We're in the halftime of this year's convention phase of the election, and so far, we see no sign of a bounce. I'm Frank Newport, Gallup Editor-in-Chief, and this is Election Matters. Hello, everybody. Susan Page is on assignment this week. I'll have a special guest, Jeff Jones, our managing editor at Gallup, in just a minute, and we'll talk about convention bounces. But let's set the stage here. We are midway between the two back-to-back conventions. The Republicans had theirs last week in Tampa Bay. Now the Democrats are underway in Charlotte. And then after that, we will have several weeks where both candidates will be campaigning vigorously. And then in October 3rd to be specific, we'll move into the debate phase of the campaign, 3 presidential debates, 1 vice presidential debate, and then it's on to the election. Let's take stock of where we stand at this point. And basically, where we stand at this point is no different than where we stood the last time we talked, or the week before that, or the week before that. I'm going to bring in here Jeff Jones, our managing editor, who's been studying and writing about our convention bounce now for a number of elections. Jeff, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
First question, of course, is no bounce. I guess I'm making a statement rather than a question, but we just didn't see much sign that Mitt Romney and the Republicans improved their position in the horse race standing based on the convention, correct?
That's accurate. What we did is we looked at Gallup tracking for the last 4 days before the Republican convention and the first 4 days after. So going into the convention, Romney was at 47% of the vote, and after the convention is at 46. So if anything, he certainly didn't gain, but if anything, he might have even lost a little. But I think the safest thing to say is he got no bounce from this convention.
Now, this is unusual because historically, and we've been looking at data going back to 64, the Republican candidate does get a bounce, and that was as recent as 08 when John McCain got a bounce, right?
That's correct. McCain had a 6-point bounce in 08, which is pretty typical. The average going back to 64 is 5 points, so Romney is in pretty rare company. There's only three presidential candidates, in fact, who didn't get any bounce. So Romney's now on a list with John Kerry in 2004 and George McGovern in 1972 as having gotten no bounce, no increase in support after their party nominated him as their presidential candidate.
You know, one way that we could look at this is to say there are two broad explanations. Some people who look at this are opining now that the era of the bounce is gone. That is, Americans are so polarized and tuned into the election, or tuned out of the election, either way you want to look at it, but so polarized in whom they're going to vote for that there are just not a lot of people to be bounced. That is, not a lot of people to move. Of course, the other interpretation is that Mitt Romney and the Republicans didn't do enough to excite the voters. I guess we can't say for sure which of those is the cause, but it's possible, Jeff, that we may be moving into a new era that's going to have less of a bounce than we've seen historically from these, what everybody agrees are kind of outdated conventions.
I think that's definitely true, and I think both of those aspects are probably true in this case. The last few elections, going back to 2004, people have been paying attention to the election in great numbers well before the convention, so you assume if they're paying attention, they have a pretty good idea who the candidates are and who they prefer. So seeing, the speeches at the convention probably isn't going to affect things. But in 2008, we saw a lot of people paying attention to the convention or to the campaign before the convention, but both McCain and Obama got a bounce. So maybe what we're seeing here is maybe there is potential for a bounce, but we're more likely to see that in an open election when an incumbent isn't running than we're seeing this year for Romney, and we saw in 2004. In 2004, neither Kerry nor Bush got much of a bounce when Bush was running for a second term. I think in those elections, people are pretty much deciding whether they want the president to have 4 more years, so it's a different decision. And I think people have enough information about the president well before the conventions that they pretty much have an idea how they're going to vote, and therefore what happens at the convention, or maybe much of what happens in the campaign, isn't going to affect that opinion.
Yeah, notice also that this year Romney didn't create a great deal of suspense leading into the day before the convention or 3 days before the convention by his announcement of his vice president. He announced Ryan significantly before the convention. So that kind of removed that away from the convention. And maybe if there was a bounce, we saw it a little before the convention this year. I guess, Jeff, what we're going to look for now, in line with all these theories, is what happens at the Democratic convention. If Obama does get a significant bounce coming out of Charlotte, then we can say, aha, it wasn't structural. It was actually just that the Republicans didn't do much this year. But that's an empirical question, and we'll wait and see what happens after the Democratic convention, right?
Yeah, and I think actually this helps Obama because going in with Romney not getting a bounce and the history we saw from '04, probably the expectation going in is he won't improve much after the convention. So if he actually does get a bounce, then he'll be in a much stronger position than he is now. And if he doesn't, that's kind of what people are expecting. So it's not necessarily going to hurt him at all not to improve after the convention.
Yeah, I've been saying that I think a critical time for us to look at is September 7th through the 13th. That's the week after the Obama speech this coming Thursday night. And that's when we'll really begin to see if the voters' preferences for either Obama or Romney have reset themselves. That's the word I'm using, reset. The race has been very close among registered voters so far, basically both candidates in and around 46% of the vote. So we'll wait and see. If there's a significant change in coming out of it over the next week or two, we see one of the other candidates significantly ahead, then we'll say, aha, the convention phase reset things. If not, we'll say, we're right back where we started, and then wait for the conventions to see what impact they'll have. Jeff, thank you for joining us. We'll see what happens. Monitor us at Gallup.com. We'll be putting up, of course, our daily rolling average on the convention and the horse race every single day. We'll also, this coming weekend, ask Americans how they rated Obama's speech. He did very well in '08, so it's going to be interesting to see if our rating of his speech this weekend matches the very positive ratings that his speech got when he was a fresh young candidate back in 2008. Those are all empirical questions, and we'll wait and see what the data shows. I'm Frank Newport, Gallup editor-in-chief, and this is Election Matters.